Welcome to the Adopt Well podcast, where we discuss helpful topics for anyone touched by adoption. I'm your host, Macy Peralt, here with my co-host, friend, and fellow adoptive mama, Amy Bagwell. You'll find this episode to be especially helpful if you're entering the adoption process as a hopeful adoptive parent. Today we're chatting with Erin Nasmith. Erin is a licensed clinical social worker. She's completed over 50 home studies in the state of North Carolina, and she's worked in the adoption field for over 16 years. Erin is also the director and co-founder of the Adoption Support Alliance here in Charlotte, North Carolina. Erin actually did my home study, and I can tell you with total honesty that she made the process so stress-free and awesome, so she's the perfect person to talk about this. She has a huge heart for the adoption triad to be well-equipped in both knowledge and community, and we're so excited to share her with you today.
So Erin, like Macy said, we're so excited that you're joining us today, and we have so many questions just about the logistics of home studies. But first, we'd love for you to share a little bit about yourself and what made you even pursue this career.
Yeah, that's a good question. So I got interested in adoption when I was in high school, sophomore, junior in high school. And my family lived overseas for my dad's job, and I did some volunteer work in orphanages in China and Vietnam. And my experiences there sort of sparked something for me, made me passionate about this space and what I felt like. I really just felt a calling to it.
Yeah.
The way that dream and calling has taken shape in reality has changed over the years. When I realized that we had kids in our own country who didn't have families and worked in the foster care system for a little while. I'm a licensed clinical social worker, so I had to do some hours of supervision as part of that training, but always wanted to get back to the adoption space. So once my youngest daughter was about a year, I started doing adoption home studies. So that was about 7 years ago, I guess.
Okay.
And so that's what brought me to the career.
That is awesome. So can you start off by just telling us a little bit of Home Study 101? Like, what is a home study?
Sure, yeah. So I think the basics is that a home study is an evaluation. Really, it's the state evaluating your home to make sure that it is appropriate for children. But that's sort of at the most basic level. But I really think of it as an evaluation on both sides, so that, yes, as a social worker, I'm coming in and making sure your home is safe and that you have the financial means to be able to care for a child. But at the same time, I also think it's part of my job to help make sure that you're prepared for the adoption in general, and kind of know what you're getting yourself into, know what to expect, know some of the common things that can be difficult for families, just to sort of help support you through that process, so that when you're making choices on your side about the type of child you're interested in, whether you want an open or closed adoption, that you're really informed in making those decisions too. So it is an evaluation, but I think it's much more than that in terms of the relationship that I have with my clients.
And so that obviously means you're really good at your job because you genuinely do care, which I think is really, really special. I know this is a really broad question, but I know for me and a lot of people who probably went into a home study knowing really not what to expect, just give us an overview, like what are the requirements of a home study? Sure.
Yeah, so one of the things that I think is important to understand is that the home study process is a very regulated process. So we're in North Carolina. In the state of North Carolina, there are very specific rules about what has to be in a home study. So one of the things I want people to understand is that I'm not just coming in and asking all these really personal questions because I'm curious or I want to put you on the spot.
Right.
The state, the agency that I work for is licensed by the state, and the state comes in and audits our files to make sure that what is in our home study is matching what's in the regulations. And at the same time, also the court system when you file for adoption, is kind of making sure that the home study is in line with the requirements for the state too. So we don't make these things up, for the most part. There are rules that we're following, right?
Good to know.
So it basically involves usually it's 2 visits with the family. At least one of them needs to be in your home so that we can sort of just see the physical space that you're bringing the child into. The home, for our purposes, this is different for foster care, but for a private domestic adoption, the home doesn't have to be, you don't even have to have a crib. You don't have to have like all the plug outlet covers on. You don't have to have gates up, like anything like that. We just want to see that the physical space matches the description that we're putting in the home study and that it's generally a safe space for a child. So those are really just, we're describing the number of bedrooms and bathrooms and some safety features in the house.
So cool. I remember, even though I had read online, like, you really don't have to go through your house with a fine-tooth comb.
Yeah.
You really don't have to do everything. We were still like putting the child locks on every cabinet and doing everything.
And I remember your house being immaculate.
Oh,
Macy,
yes.
for sure.
Totally. I remember that you drank black coffee.
Do you?
Yes.
That's so funny.
I love it.
Sometimes I feel like, because I know families feel nervous about it, and I totally understand that. So sometimes I'm like, okay, show me all the places you cleaned. Let me like look in your closets if you want me to do that so that I can tell you how well organized they are. Because I know people, spend a lot of time getting ready, even though they don't have to. But you're having someone come in your home to evaluate, and I get it. As comfortable as I can make you feel, there's still sort of that power dynamic that happens regardless of what our relationship is like.
Okay, so give us some more details on, like, what are the requirements, the rules of a home study?
Yeah, sure. So when you're thinking about the physical space, there's actually very little requirement in North Carolina for a private domestic adoption. So it doesn't matter if you live in an apartment, it doesn't matter if you're renting or if you own your house. Any of that is acceptable. All we're really looking for is that there's physical space for the child to sleep, and for a private domestic adoption, they don't need their own bedrooms. They can be sharing a bedroom with another child. That's totally fine. And that there's generally space. I think the words we use are that there's ample space for storage of their things and stuff.
Yeah.
Okay. If your house is overflowing with boxes and you're a hoarder and you have no room for anything else, that would be like a little bit of an issue. But if the child just has like even a large walk-in closet where you're going to put their pack and play for the first year, I mean, that's totally fine. So we're not talking about, there really are very stringent requirements in terms of the physical space that the child's coming home to.
Okay, and that's specifically for like a private domestic adoption. Is the same true through the foster care system, or is it different at all?
In the foster care system, there are many more rules about what the physical space has to be for a child. So they need their own room or need to be with same-sex siblings. They definitely need a bed. There's a lot more around that a private domestic adoption doesn't get into.
Makes sense.
That's really good to know.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell us a little bit about like the background check, fingerprinting, all of that, like sort of scary, time consuming stuff that's not really scary?
Yeah. It shouldn't be too scary. It is a little bit of a pain in terms of the paperwork because there is a federal check for a criminal activity, and there's also a state check for criminal activity, and there's also a county check for criminal activity, and none of those things talk to each other. So you could have a record, you could have a state charge that doesn't come up on an FBI check or a federal charge that doesn't come up on your county check. And so for the agency that I work for, we require a federal check and a state check. So it's 2 sets of fingerprinting that have to be done. And then we also require a child abuse check in every state that you've lived in for the past 5 years. So, and that's really just paperwork that you sign to say I can do the check, and then I fill it, I send it off. So that one of the things is that we don't want to approve a family who has any sort of criminal record that is involves physical aggression or drug use or anything like that. Now, if you've had if you had the one time in college where you made a bad choice and there's a charge on your record, that's we can work around that. We just need an explanation. We need you to be fully upfront with us about what happened, and we just need to talk through and explain it in the home study. But it's not going to keep you from adopting.
Gotcha.
But it can't be ignored either.
Yes.
Yeah.
Totally. So. That really does make sense. So how much does the average home study cost, and how much time does it typically take from start to finish?
Sure. I think the general average price is probably $1,300 to $2,000 for the home study. The agency I work for, it sits right at $1,400, and I think that probably is a little bit on the low side.
Okay.
It takes 2 home visits. So there is some, in terms of the time frame, there's some things that are dependent on like how well your schedules match up with the social worker's schedule. Usually we're able to do those visits within 2 weeks, within a 2-week time frame. And then our home study is completed a month after the second visit. So that's all in probably an average of 6 to 8 weeks it takes from the time you get the application to the time you have the finished home study.
Yeah, which
that's
is
generally speaking.
Really pretty quick, I feel like.
I think it is pretty quick. And I mean, some of that is dependent on the client. If you're the type of person who likes lists and checks off the paperwork and gets that all done really quickly, then it can go a little bit faster. But sometimes that's not people's strengths, then getting the paperwork can take a little bit longer to pull together. And we certainly need all the paperwork before we can finalize everything.
Oh, yeah.
For sure, which does make sense.
Mm-hmm. It is true that by regulation, home studies need to be completed 90 days from the time an application is received. So
I didn't know
that's
that.
generally something like nobody should go past 90 days as long as it's not, a medical record or something that's holding up the process. Yeah.
So what are some other things that could slow down the home study process?
Yeah, generally, so one of the things that is required is that a medical form be completed for each member of the household. And I find that that's the medical piece can be a little bit of a sticking point for people because insurance doesn't cover a physical. And sometimes if you don't have a good relationship with a doctor that you're seeing regularly, it can be a little bit more difficult to get someone to fill out that piece of paper. It's not very specific. It basically, you need the doctor to say that you have a normal expectancy and that you're physically and emotionally able to parent a child. So it's not, we just want to know that you're not going to die tomorrow or you don't have some really horrible, difficult disease or something. But that can vary from doctor to doctor about how comfortable they are signing that or what they require of you to get in to see them. So that's generally the thing that takes the longest. So the other piece that sometimes takes more time for people is we do require references to be submitted from friends or family members. And so sometimes that's the thing that we're following up on is references are a little bit slower to turn in their letters.
Yeah.
So
I remember asking my friends for those, and at first I was a little nervous, like, what are they going to say? And it ended up being some of the most encouraging things about why we would be great parents or whatnot. So that was a fun part of the process.
Yeah, I think it can be. And I always tell people they can figure out who their best friends are based on that, on who's the fastest to write about it.
That's true. That's true.
So true. So how long is a home study typically valid for? And if a family has already completed a home study in the past, but it has either expired or it's been a few years and they want to adopt again, do they have to do a separate one?
Yeah, that's a good question. So you guys probably talked in other podcasts about the fact that every state in the United States kind of has its own adoption laws that govern that state. So that's true on how long the home study is good for as well. Oh. So in the state of North Carolina, a home study is good for 18 months.
Oh, wow.
But I think most other states, it's only a year,
That's
only
how it
12
was
months.
For us
yeah.
in South
So
Carolina.
for most of the time, you need an update, especially if you're looking at multiple states. You're not sure which state your birth mom is going to live in, or then you need to update things every year. But the update part is not hard. You just need, it's not as hard as the first full home study. You need new background checks and new medical checks. Both of those pieces need to be good within a year. And we also get updated financial information. So your most recent tax return, just to show your income. So that is the piece that, and it's just, it's called an update. It's probably 2 or 3 pages that just kind of attaches to your original home study, and then you're good for another year.
Okay.
In terms of your question about if you want to adopt again, and it's been a couple of years since the first one was done, that those situations you need a more complete update. Like oftentimes, people are doing a home study because they've already adopted once and they want to adopt again. So we need to do an update that includes this new child and what that child is like and what you've learned in terms of parenting and what your relationship is with the birth parents and whether that's open or closed. And so that's a little bit more, takes a little bit more time. There's one more visit that happens then.
Okay, I have a question based off of something we experienced actually. We actually, after we had gotten our home study, my husband's job was in a different city. We couldn't decide if we were going to move or stay in the same area. So we went back and forth and almost didn't want to move because we didn't want to have to redo our home study. But then we made the choice to move, and I'm so glad we did because it wasn't a huge deal, and we were able to bring our daughter home into like a permanent setting that we weren't planning to move in the next couple of years. Mm-hmm. So does that happen frequently? And tell us a little bit of what that looks like if people do move from the time they've had the home study done, but before they actually bring a child into their home.
Yes. Okay. So it does certainly happen. I mean, you can't put your life on hold because you're waiting for this adoption placement, and things happen and you never know when the adoption is going to take place. And so, yes, it definitely happens. I'm working with a family now who's moving from out of state. So basically what happens is the agency that you're working with in the state that you're moving from will provide the agency that in North Carolina with all of your background, your paperwork, and all of the stuff that you need, all of the stuff that supports your home study. And so then it is our job as the new agency, we sort of take on the liability, quote unquote, of your family. And so we then take that information and take a look at the sending state and we need to make sure that the home study meets the North Carolina regulations. So this is nothing that the family has to worry about, but there's like some requirements that we just have to make sure are in there. So we will definitely do a home visit to your new home in the new state, talk through the pieces that are missing, check out the new space and make sure it's appropriate for the family, and then update the home study to reflect the new state and make sure those requirements that North Carolina needs are in that document. So it's doable. The other thing, in addition to seeing your new space in North Carolina, is we need the background checks for the state of North Carolina and the child abuse clearances for the state of North Carolina since you're in a new state. So it is a couple more pieces of paper, but the medical stuff, the references, all of that stuff stays the same. And a big part of the home study, this is true for updates as well as moves. A good chunk of the home study is sort of talking about your childhood and how you were raised and how your parents disciplined you and the kinds of supports you have.
Right.
And those things don't change,
So
anytime you're doing an update or a job change or anything like that, there's a good portion of the home study that stays true because your childhood doesn't go back and change when you make life changes.
Yes.
So true. So once a child has joined your family, like after your home study is complete, you've done your adoption, you do what's called a post-placement visit. And I know in some states there are more than one post-placement visit.
Yeah.
So can you kind of walk us through what parents can expect for that visit or those visits?
Sure. Yeah, you're right. So just like with the home study requirements, every state has its own requirements in terms of post-placement supervision, just to keep everyone confused and on their toes as we go through this process. So the post-placement is really, so the child is in your care, but they are technically not legally, the adoption hasn't been legally finalized yet. So that's why the social worker is coming out to make sure that the baby's doing okay, but also to make sure that you as the parents are doing okay as well. And to put any supports around you that you might need to be successful. So it can be anywhere from 1 to, I think the most I've done is 6 post-placement visit.
That is
You
a
know,
lot.
it's a lot.
I've never heard of that.
Wow.
Yeah, Texas requires 6 most places. So yeah, it's a lot. So really those are kind of fun. I mean, they're certainly fun for me. I hope they're not too painful for the family, but it really is just coming in and showing off your baby, talking about the last time you went to the doctor, talking about the new things they're doing, talking about the fact that you don't get enough sleep, but you're doing okay, trying to make sure that your marriage is still strong, encouraging you to get date nights. You know, certainly if there was anything happening with the child medically, we would be kind of checking in on that, making sure you have the referrals you need for specialists or any kind of interventions that you need. But mostly it's just showing off how cute the baby is and feeling like you're, you know, I try to give families a lot of encouragement about the stage that they're in and that it will end.
Yes.
You know,
You're not crazy.
Yeah, that's right.
What we all need to hear.
It's okay. They're gonna start sleeping soon, I promise.
Yes.
So those are pretty, I think, relatively painless. But it's also an opportunity if, you know, the child did have some medical need that came up that became too overwhelming for your family and you felt like you weren't equipped to do it. I mean, it's a supervision process on both sides.
Right.
You know, I would never want a family to decide not to pursue the adoption, but there is a, you know, opportunity on both sides to just make sure that everybody feels good and that we're ready to move towards finalization.
Okay.
Definitely.
Okay, so you've been doing this for several years. What are some of the most common misconceptions about home studies? And they can be funny or they can be serious. But kind of like we said, like I cleaned all my closets thinking, and then, I mean, didn't even look in the closets.
Yes,
you know what I mean? So
I
I'm
know.
like, oh, wow.
I really think that's the biggest one. I
Really?
think people get really caught up in making their house look a certain way and feeling that like that helps you I don't know, get approved, like that you'll get a higher grade. And really this is like a pass fail kind of thing. And the number of people who fail is very slim. You know, the failure piece is really not an option. More it's like, let's talk it through a little bit more and figure out and educate ourselves around certain issues or something. That might be the only thing. So I think that's the biggest misconception. I think that what I wish people would know about home studies is that your social worker is supposed to be on your side and an advocate for you. And so I think sometimes people feel like they're going to be judged when someone comes in to do your home study. And it's a little bit difficult because right at the base level, there is an evaluation process that happens and you can't really get away from that. But I'm never looking to trip a family up or put you on the spot. And I try to tell people at the beginning, like, it's okay if you don't know the answer and we might need to talk it through, you know, we'll get there and I can give you more resources if you're not sure, so that I'm not, you know, I don't want them to feel like I'm watching and waiting for them to trip up. I really want to be on their side.
That's good.
In this process, I think it's probably true that people don't necessarily tell me what they were expecting. Like, I don't know if I get to hear what they thought I was going to be like.
Yeah.
So you might need to ask an adoptive parent what it felt like going in. I mean, I don't know. Were you scared?
Oh, I thought it
Macy,
was
when
great. I was nervous, but only because of the things that I had read on the internet.
Yeah,
From
for
like,
sure.
some people are like, chill, it's not a big deal. Have your house normal how it usually it is. You'll look weirder if like everything is perfect.
Yeah.
That would be more of a red flag, you know, leave some dishes in the sink, chill out. But then there were still those neurotic people that were like, well, why wouldn't you just cross your T's and dot your I's?
Right.
You never know what kind of social worker you're going to get. And I remember like within minutes of meeting you, I was just like, okay, this is going to be okay.
Yeah.
I did not have to stress about this.
Oh, good. Well, I do think there's some nervousness too that comes from like, because one of the first questions that we ask typically that I ask, I guess I should say, is like, what brought you to adoption? And so for some people, that's a hard thing to talk about, you know, that there's infertility or there's a miscarriages and they so badly want to be a parent and to parent. And so I know that can be emotional for people. But so I think that there is some anxiety that just comes from like having to share your story again.
Yeah. The other thing I feel like that could be tough, and I mean, you've obviously experienced this more than I have, but I have a friend who I was speaking with this speaking to about this recently who works with home study stuff, and she said that, like, essentially, if you're not on the same page in your marriage about the adoption and what you're open to and what your history has been, that could be problematic, essentially.
Yeah, I think it can. And I mean, I think that, again, we're not trying to find holes in your, we're not trying to find ways that you disagree, but we certainly want to make sure that both parties are on the same page, because the worst thing that could happen is you start facing the challenges of raising a child at 6 months, and one parent looks at the other and says, this is your fault because I wasn't really, that's the kind of stuff that we're trying to avoid.
Yeah.
And those are also the kinds of issues, or the kinds of areas where, it's, if you feel a little bit of tension, then it might just be like, okay, I think maybe you guys need to talk a little bit more about what races that you're open to, because it sounds like maybe we have some different thoughts about it. So here are some books that here are some podcasts you can listen to. Here are some, trainings you can do online to just help you kind of have the words to talk about it.
That's great.
Yeah.
So just your friendly reminder to be on the same page with your spouse.
Mm-hmm.
Before you enter into adoption at all. I mean, I know that we've talked about that before, but it really is vital that you and your spouse, not just for the purpose of the home study, but for the purpose of the future of your marriage and your child.
Yeah, absolutely.
That you guys are in not just agreeance, but they're both excited. And
I think that's very true.
Yeah, you're not dragging your husband along.
Yes, yeah. So one of the things that adoptive parents have told me on this after the home study is finished is there is a benefit to, when you get pregnant with a biological child, you're not necessarily sitting down with your spouse and saying, okay, these are the ways that this is how I want to parent, or this is how I want to discipline, or these are the values that I want to raise my child with. Right. So it does create a space and an opportunity for you to have those conversations with one another in a way that is intentional, that having biological children, you just don't have the opportunity to do that. So I do think that oftentimes couples, sometimes there is some discussion around those things, but I do think couples learn a little bit about each other and about what their vision is for their family long term. That can be really helpful to solidify their marriage and to help put everybody on the same page. And it can be a benefit, even though it might feel like a little bit of an inconvenience at the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like extra preparation, though.
It's extra
which
preparation.
Is awesome.
Exactly.
Such a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
So I have a question, and it's very random.
Okay.
But can you tell us whose eyes are the home study for?
Yeah.
Like, who is going to see the home study when it's all completed? Is this for the agency? Is this for the judge? Can expectant parents have access to it? Can you tell us, like, who gets to see it?
Sure. That's a great question. So if you are working with an agency, then then it's really just the agency provider who has eyes on it and reads it carefully. A copy does go to the clerk of court, and a copy does go to the judge when the adoption is finalized. How carefully they're reading those, I'm not really sure. Like, I don't think that they might just kind of generally skim them. I don't think that they're looking at them really carefully. So I think the main people who are looking at it are your home study provider, who's deciding if you're approved family, and then the agency who's doing the placement, so that they can make an appropriate match for you with the birth mother. That gives them a way to know you. Now, if you're doing an independent adoption, which means that you're working with an attorney or a facilitator, or not a licensed child placing agency, then the birth parent will get a copy of the home study, because in an independent adoption, the birth parent is signing, relinquishing their rights and giving permission for you to adopt. Whereas with an agency, the baby is technically going from the birth parent to the agency's care and then to your care.
Oh, wow.
So in that case, the agency only needs to see your stuff. But if you're using an attorney and the birth parent is signing the child over to you, they need to be fully informed of who they're giving their child to, right? And so they are legally required to be given a copy of your home study in that case.
Wow, I did not know that.
Yeah.
Okay, Erin, so Macy and I have talked about how we love the way that you're bringing the adoption community together in person, and obviously we're big believers in getting out from just behind our phone screens and sitting knee to knee, which is why I love that we're doing this podcast in person.
Yeah.
But I would love for you to tell us a little bit more about what you are doing with the Adoption Support Alliance here in Charlotte.
Sure. Yeah. So I kind of wear two different hats in this adoption realm right now. I'm the executive director of a nonprofit organization here in Charlotte called Adoption Support Alliance, like you said. And part of what we're doing through Adoption Support Alliance is trying to create community around adoptive families. So we offer trainings, we offer support groups, we offer just sort of community building play dates. We go to the playground together, we hang out at breweries, family-friendly breweries together, just to kind of put adoptive families in the same space, and in the hopes that those relationships will form. And the other pieces that we offer counseling support for families, or for children, depending on what the needs are. So I kind of work in both spaces simultaneously, which I love, because then I can have long-term relationships with families and walk them through from the beginning of the process to all the way beyond post-placement.
And we can definitely include some information about that in the show notes if anyone does live in the Charlotte area and would love to learn more. I think that would be really helpful.
For sure. It's a super valuable resource, for sure. Well, friends, Amy and I are so glad that you joined us for another episode. We hope you enjoyed listening and learning. Are you in need of a home study in the state of North Carolina? Don't hesitate to reach out to Erin so she can assist you. We'd be honored if you'd leave us an honest review before you go. You can find us on social media at AdoptWell and check out our website at www.adoptwell.com. We look forward to spending more time with you in the future as we all learn together how we can adopt well.